Let's say you have a bus. It seats 40 people. Then someone runs up and says, "Dude, I've got a genius idea. Let's tear the bus apart and replace it with 10 cars. 4 people per car. And guess what? All 10 cars combined will somehow cost less than one bus." What's your first reaction? Mine is, how exactly? Let's do some kindergarten math. One bus needs one engine. 10 cars need 10 engines. One bus has 4 wheels. 10 cars, 40 wheels. Making something smaller does not magically shrink every cost in proportion. Because many systems still have to be complete, no matter how small the thing is. Economists have a name for this: economies of scale. So why am I telling you this? Because one nuclear startup is basically pitching the same story. That company is Oklo. AI celebrity Sam Altman was an early investor, and he served as chairman for about a decade. Oklo builds small nuclear reactors, known in the industry as SMRs. Its pitch is simple. A small reactor can cost less than a large nuclear plant. The first time I saw that claim, I had the same reaction as I did with the bus example. So today, we are opening the hood and checking the math. Standard disclaimer: this is my personal analysis based on public information. It is not investment advice. To compare big reactors and small reactors, you cannot just compare sticker prices. That is not analysis. That is accounting cosplay. A $700 million small reactor and a $2.8 billion large reactor might make the small one look 4 times cheaper. Except the large plant may produce 9 times more power. So we need one ruler: capital cost per kilowatt. In plain English, that means how much you pay for each unit of generating capacity. You check the price per pound at the grocery store. Nuclear plants deserve the same courtesy. Great, now we have our measuring stick. Let's bring out the contestants. I picked a few representative projects. China's Hualong 1 and Linglong 1 come in at roughly $2,200 to $5,500 per kilowatt. America's new Vocal units climb to more than $15,000 per kilowatt. NuScale's SMR reached roughly $20,000 per kilowatt. And the project collapsed. TerraPower is around $11,000 per kilowatt. So what does Oklo claim? Its 15 megawatt version, $70 million or about $4,700 per kilowatt. Its 50 megawatt version, $145 million or about $2,900 per kilowatt. See the problem? Oklo's estimate is cheaper than China's Linglong 1 SMR. It is barely above Hualong 1. It is roughly 1/4 of TerraPower's estimated cost, even though TerraPower is probably the closest technological comparison. And it is about 1/7 of NuScale. Here is the extra twist. China has one of the deepest nuclear supply chains in the world. It has lower labor cost, and it has some of the fastest nuclear construction execution anywhere. Even with all those home field advantages, China's small reactor still costs more than twice as much per kilowatt as its large reactor. Then, an American startup facing expensive labor and a nuclear supply chain that barely exists says it can build for less than Linglong 1 and at roughly the same cost as Hualong 1. That is like someone getting their driver's license yesterday and claiming they can lap the Nürburgring faster than Max Verstappen. Not physically impossible, but you had better bring one spectacular explanation. To be fair, I do not think Oklo is pure vaporware. There are 2 main arguments behind its cost story, and both make sense on paper. Move number 1, factory production. Basically, build the reactor like Lego. Oklo argues that nuclear plants are expensive because every project is custom built. You have thousands of workers pouring concrete in the middle of nowhere, dealing with site-specific problems for years and years. Oklo's answer is, we are not doing that. We must produce components in factories, ship them to the site, and assemble them. More like Lego blocks. One custom-made component is expensive, but if you build 100 identical ones, the unit cost should come down. So instead of getting economies of scale from one giant reactor, Oklo wants to get scale through volume. Not one huge machine, many identical small machines. That is the first part of the pitch. Move number 2, change the reactor technology. Oklo uses a sodium-cooled fast reactor. Most nuclear plants today are pressurized water reactors. They use water as the coolant. Water is great, but it has one very annoying habit. At normal pressure, it boils at 100 degrees Celsius. But inside a reactor, the coolant needs to operate at more than 300 degrees Celsius and still remain liquid. So how do you stop it from boiling? Pressure. A lot of pressure. You basically force the boiling point upward. A typical pressurized water reactor keeps the water at around 150 atmospheres. How extreme is that? That is like stacking about 75 pressure cookers into one very bad day. And this is why pressurized water reactors need enormous steel pressure vessels, high pressure pipes, high pressure valves, and massive containment structures. A huge part of the cost comes from one word: pressure. Oklo uses liquid sodium instead. Sodium boils at close to 900 degrees Celsius, so it can operate at very high temperatures while staying close to normal atmospheric pressure. No giant pressure requirement. And if you remove the pressure, then in theory, you can remove some of the thick, expensive, pressure-rated hardware. That part makes sense. Sodium fast reactors also have some nice physics working in their favor. As the temperature rises, the nuclear reaction naturally weakens. And after shutdown, natural circulation can help remove heat. Sounds beautiful, right? The logic is internally consistent. But anyone who has ever looked at an investment pitch knows one thing. Everything before the word but was the sales deck. And here comes the but. Sodium has anger management issues. Anyone who survived high school chemistry knows this. Sodium reacts violently with water. It can also burn in air. So yes, you removed water from the reactor core. But electricity still usually comes from boiling water to spin a turbine. And yes, Oklo still plans to use a conventional steam cycle. It has even signed agreements for turbine equipment, which means sodium and water still have to meet somewhere. Not directly, of course. They meet across a heat exchanger wall. On one side, you have sodium that hates water. On the other side, you have hot, high-pressure steam. And between them, a metal tube wall. Historically, that wall has been one of sodium reactors' favorite places to ruin everyone's week. Japan's Monju had sodium-related problems. Britain's prototype fast reactor also had trouble in this area. A tiny leak can become a very expensive fire drill. Oklo would argue that its system uses less sodium and has a simpler design, so the risk should be smaller. That is a fair argument. But the old enemies still live in the same apartment building. Sodium and water may not be roommates, but they are definitely neighbors. There is another issue. Sodium is opaque. In a water reactor, you can inspect the inside more directly. With sodium, you are basically working in a metal soup you cannot see through. Inspection and maintenance require specialized tools. That can make the work slower, harder, and more expensive. So yes, compared with a pressurized water reactor, a sodium design may remove some pressure vessels, high-pressure piping, and active safety systems. That part is real. But then it adds other things: an intermediate sodium loop, sodium pumps, sodium-to-sodium heat exchangers, inert gas protection, leak detection systems, fire suppression systems, and the legendary sodium water failure point still sits inside the steam generator. So you remove old equipment, and then you add new equipment. This is not magic. This is engineering. It is a bit like saying an electric car must be cheaper because it has no gasoline engine, no transmission, no fuel tank, and no exhaust system. True, but then you add a giant battery pack, battery management software, high voltage electronics, thermal management, and all the rest. The final bill does not automatically get smaller. It just changes shape. Now let's look at the supply chain. I use AI to break down from first principles every major input for a 15 megawatt Oklo plant. It likely needs more than 30 specialized suppliers, so I turned the supply chain into a traffic light chart. Green light, concrete, electrical work, cooling towers, and other conventional equipment. Available, affordable, no major issue. But remember, the cheap parts were never the expensive parts. Yellow light, nuclear-grade vessels and nuclear-grade forgings. Global capacity is limited, and the line is long. Red light, sodium pumps and sodium heat exchangers. Qualified suppliers worldwide could almost fit in one group chat. Oklo recently bought a sodium engineering company. That is basically an admission. If the market cannot sell it to you, you have to build it yourself. Double red light, fuel. This one deserves its own section. Oklo uses high-assay, low-enriched uranium, known as HALEU. Its enrichment level approaches 20%. Conventional reactors typically use 3 to 5% enriched fuel. To make the reactor smaller, you need higher energy density. That is one unavoidable cost of miniaturization. So, how expensive is HALEU? Conventional reactor fuel is roughly $2,700 per kilogram. A market reference for Oklo type HALEU is about $25,600 per kilogram, almost 10 times more. Just last week, the US Department of Energy signed a major domestic commercial HALEU contract with Centrus. The implied price was about $17,000 per kilogram. And what does Oklo assume in its financial model? $7,000 per kilogram. That is about 40% of the contract price. Even stranger, it is less than 2.6 times the price of ordinary 5% enriched fuel. Budgeting HALEU at $7,000 is like trying to buy a Manhattan condo with small-town Ohio money. That is not optimism. That is Zillow fan fiction. Then add American labor costs. Nuclear certified welders, nuclear quality inspectors, engineers with sodium experience. These are not people you hire by posting help wanted on Craigslist. They are scarce specialties. Their wages can be several times higher than ordinary industrial labor. For a first-of-a-kind plant, I believe Oklo's cost estimate is seriously understated. If you build the cost from the bottom up and add every component, realistic first unit estimates often land between $150 million and $300 million. That is 2 to 4 times Oklo's $70 million figure. Some people say every new technology needs a brave first customer. Fair enough. But sodium reactors are not exactly a brand new idea looking for their first beta tester. They have had 70 years of beta testers, and the user reviews are not great. So let's read the guest list. France's Super Phoenix cost more than $9 billion. It existed for 13 years and spent much of that time shut down for repairs. It closed in 1998. Japan's Monju cost about $5.9 billion. A sodium leak caused a fire in 1995. Over more than 20 years, it generated power for only about 250 days. That is roughly 12 days per year. Even Congress works more than that. Monju was retired in 2016. America's Fermi 1 suffered a partial core meltdown in 1966. That incident inspired a book called We Almost Lost Detroit. Germany's SMR 300 was completed, but never operated for a single day. It was eventually turned into an amusement park, possibly the most expensive nuclear-themed roller coaster in history. America's Clinch River project ran massively over budget. Congress killed it in 1983. Russia's BN 600 is one of the few survivors, but survival came with a price. 27 sodium leaks and 14 sodium fires over roughly 2 decades. So the pattern is not exactly subtle. First, sodium is hard to handle. It leaks, it burns, and you cannot see through it. Repairs can take years. Second, every plant became a custom science project. No mass production, no learning curve, no meaningful cost decline. Third, the original economics collapsed. These reactors were designed for a world where people expected uranium to run out. Instead, uranium stayed abundant and relatively cheap. Oklo says its reactor is smaller, uses less sodium, and has a simpler system. That can reduce the old problems. It cannot erase them. Sodium is still sodium. Opaque is still opaque. And the steam generator is still the steam generator. History gives us no profitable commercial precedent for this route. 2 more points are worth mentioning, but I won't spend too much time on them. First, executives have been selling shares. Oklo's CEO has reportedly sold about 200,000 shares almost every month under a preset trading plan. In January alone, the proceeds exceeded $30 million. To be clear, this was a compliant, scheduled trading plan. It does not prove any conspiracy. But when management tells the market that its reactor economics could rewrite the industry while cashing out month after month, investors can draw their own conclusions. Second, cash burn, dilution, and high interest rates. The company currently has almost no revenue. Its guidance implies roughly $400 million to $500 million of cash burn this year. It survives through repeated stock issuance. It recently raised well over $1 billion and also prepared another $1 billion of issuance capacity. Meanwhile, US interest rates are not exactly on clearance. Nuclear power is a business where cash leaves years before electricity arrives. Zero revenue, heavy cash burn, and high rates. Put those 3 together and you get a very unfriendly cocktail. So what do I actually think about SMRs? Small modular reactors are not automatically nonsense. My view has 4 layers. First, SMRs do have legitimate use cases. Mines, remote settlements, polar research stations, military bases, places that cannot connect to a large grid and may not even have a reliable fuel supply line. Diesel or natural gas has to arrive by truck, ship, or sometimes aircraft, load after load. In some places, transportation can cost more than the fuel itself. A small reactor can run for years on one fuel loading. That can eliminate a bottomless logistics problem. Back to the bus analogy. On a narrow mountain road, a bus simply cannot get in. Then the smaller vehicle is not a luxury, it is necessary. Second, replacing large nuclear plants with SMRs does not pencil out. Large reactors became large for a reason. Bigger units spread fixed costs better. That is, economies of scale. Force the design smaller and cost per kilowatt tends to rise. China's Linglong 1 has already demonstrated that lesson. Third, the dividing line is often a pipe. Where no pipeline exists, fuel arrives the hard way. Then years between refueling is a killer feature. But where the pipeline reaches the front door, including most data center locations in the continental United States, fuel can arrive continuously. You can order gas turbines from established suppliers. They can often be installed in 1 or 2 years. And the technology has a century of operating experience. In the flexible and convenient category, there is already a champion. SMRs are leaving their natural home field and challenging gas turbines on theirs. The obvious question is, why would they win? Fourth, everything eventually comes back to cost. Nuclear power really does offer low emissions, 24/7 reliability, and a small land footprint. But those advantages have a price ceiling. Against fossil power, you compare nuclear cost with natural gas cost, plus the cost of carbon emissions, such as carbon permits. Against renewables, you compare nuclear with wind and solar, plus land and battery storage costs. Today, nuclear can still win some of those equations. That is why countries continue building it. But if construction cost goes into orbit and alternatives keep getting cheaper, why would customers choose nuclear? Nostalgia? There is also a timing problem. The market cannot wait forever. AI data centers need power yesterday. Look at Stargate projects being prepared right now. They use grid electricity and bring in gas turbines as backup. Then an SMR developer arrives and says, "Don't worry, we'll build you a reactor. Power should arrive around 2028. That is like finding someone starving and saying, "Relax, I just ordered organic seeds from Amazon." My friend, dinner is an emergency. This is a DoorDash problem, not a sustainable farming seminar. My view of Oklo is cautious. It comes down to 2 sentences. First, its cost claims look far too low. They clash with engineering reality and historical experience. They are lower than Chinese SMRs built with cheaper labor and a mature supply chain. And the fuel budget assumes roughly 1/3 of market pricing. I cannot make that spreadsheet balance. Second, Oklo is trapped in a circular problem. To become cheap, it must mass produce many reactors. But if early units are uneconomic, why would customers order enough units to create mass production? It is the chicken and egg problem with uranium and venture capital. So far, there is no convincing answer. You can replace 1 bus with 10 cars. Some roads genuinely require smaller vehicles. But claiming the 10 cars will cost less? The engines disagree. The tires disagree. And 70 years of sodium reactor history disagrees. As always, this is personal analysis, not investment advice. Thanks for watching. If this was useful, please like and subscribe. See you next time.